Hey, hello there. Good afternoon. It's Brian Manning from Manning Asylum Law, and I wanted to jump on and tell you a little bit about what I think might be the worst asylum decision that I've ever seen. This is a really, really bad one. And it's instructive. You might learn something from it if you're thinking about applying for asylum or you know someone who is. They need to hear about this. Okay, so a guy calls me recently and he says that he got what's called a notice of intent to deny from the asylum office. What is that? Well, this notice of intent to deny, NOID, they call it a NOID for NOID. Well, this is a letter you get from the asylum office. If you have an interview and they make a negative decision, they say, we don't think you're eligible for asylum. But at that moment, when they make that negative decision, you, the asylum applicant, you still have legal status. Maybe your tourist status is still valid, or your student status, or a business-based status. So whatever the case, you've got legal status. They don't send your case to immigration court. That's what happens if you don't have legal status when they make a negative decision. That's called a referral, where they send your case to immigration court and you get another chance to apply or to explain, not to apply, to explain your case to the immigration judge, and the judge decides. But this is different. When someone does have legal status at the time of a negative decision, you get a notice of intent to deny. And it says, we don't think you're eligible for asylum for the following reasons. And it explains in at least a little bit of detail what the reason or reasons are that they say you're not eligible for asylum. And it says, you have 16 days to respond to us in writing to basically tell us why we're wrong. You can try to change our minds. And you do that. You respond in writing and say, well, I think I deserve asylum, and here's why you were wrong. The reasons that you gave in your notice of intent to deny are wrong, or here's information that basically shows why I should get asylum and you shouldn't deny my case. And you get 16 days to send this back in. And then they'll look at it and they'll make a decision. So this man that came to me had just received this notice of intent to deny. And this man was from Afghanistan. Now, if there's any nationality that should be getting asylum right now, it's Afghanistan, right? Because the United States, after being at war there for 20 years, pulled out and brought with us a bunch of Afghans who are at serious risk from the Taliban that is now in power since August of 2021. A lot of these Afghans have helped the United States and other Western forces, serving as translators, interpreters, and doing all kinds of things for Western militaries and for Western companies and for the United States government. And we brought a bunch of these people with us. When I say we, I mean the United States government military evacuated a bunch of Afghans and brought them to the United States. But once they're here in the United States, many of them don't have any route to get long-term legal status. They come in with something called a parole that says you get a certain amount of months to be here, up to like 2 years maximum. But once that's over, they're in trouble. They don't have any other kind of status. So most of them are applying for asylum, and most of them should qualify for asylum because they would be at serious risk of being persecuted by the Taliban if they had to go back, because the Taliban views many of these people as supporting the West and being against the politics and the policies and ideals of the Taliban. There's an element usually of political persecution and often religious persecution at issue in these cases from Afghanistan. So this particular guy from Afghanistan contacts me, and he had been in the military, the Afghan military, for over 20 years. And he worked in that capacity very closely with Western forces, including the United States. And so this guy, he's in serious danger. He would be in serious danger if he had to go back to Afghanistan, big time. And some other things have happened that indicate that he is already on the radar or the list of the Taliban. So he's in real danger. He should definitely win asylum. But here he is, having received a notice of intent to deny, and he comes to me and says, hey, can you help me respond to this? Of course, I do that. I'm helping him. We've done it. We've submitted it. We haven't gotten an answer yet. There's a chance that we'll win, that he'll win his case. But I got to tell you, when you get to this stage, it's very, very hard to win. if the asylum office gives you a notice of intent to deny, they very rarely change their minds. Why? Well, you'd be asking them to admit that they're wrong. And when it gets to this level, the asylum officer who did the interview has decided that you are not eligible for asylum, and their supervisor, their boss, has agreed with that determination. So it's going to be really hard to get them to go back and say, okay, well, you know what? Based on what you wrote in this rebuttal, this response, I guess you're right after all. You changed our minds. Congratulations. That is tough to make happen. Okay. You're usually not successful with that. So the odds are stacked against you. So you don't want to get to this point. You don't want to get to this place where you have to respond to this NOID. So this person didn't use a lawyer when he applied for asylum. And if he would have used a lawyer, he almost certainly would have won and not have had to deal with this notice of intent to deny. Why? Well, to get asylum as an Afghan right now, really all you have to do is prove that if you are someone who used to be in the Afghan military for the Afghan national government, that should be enough to get you asylum in and of itself. You shouldn't have to convince the asylum officer of anything else. But he didn't convince the asylum officer of even that much. He didn't convince him that he really was a member of the Afghan National Army. Why? Two reasons. One, he didn't submit any evidence for his asylum application, with his application or at the interview. He didn't submit any evidence at all. If he would have produced his military ID card, which he has with him in the United States, a military ID card, but he didn't submit that. And so he didn't have any kind of documents that showed that he was in the military. Well, you know what? Usually, actually, that's okay. You can win asylum without any documentary proof, without any evidence or documents, as long as your testimony at the interview, in other words, what you say at your interview, is detailed, consistent, and plausible. If it's detailed, consistent, and plausible, you can win asylum without any documentary evidence. So he still should have been okay, even though he should have supplied his military ID card, and he should have tried to get letters like affidavits from people that he worked with, both Afghans and people from Western military forces, saying, yes, he was in the military and we worked closely with him. He didn't do that, though. But even still, he should have been okay, because his testimony, what he said on the day of the interview, should have been sufficient to show the officer that, yeah, I really was in the military and therefore I'm at risk. And there were other things that were particular to this guy that showed that he was at even greater risk. But just convincing the officer that you're part of the military in Afghanistan should be enough. But he didn't do that at the interview because he had inconsistencies in his testimony. What does that mean? An inconsistency is when you say two things that don't line up or that conflict with each other. So if you say, yes, this incident happened in February of 2020, and then later in the interview, the officer says, tell me again, when did that incident happen? And you say, oh yeah, it was April of 2020. The officer says, oh, that's an inconsistency because those two things are different. You're telling me two different things that don't match up. They contradict each other. So when this happens two or three times, when there are several inconsistencies in the case, the officer can say, oh, there were too many inconsistencies, and therefore you're not credible, and therefore you're denied. Now, this is actually what a lot of officers go to as their excuse to deny people when they don't really have another good reason. And absent some excuse like this, they would have to give asylum to the person. They come up with this excuse. They use this, oh, there were too many inconsistencies, so you're not credible, therefore you're denied. And they can do that when a person has two or three inconsistencies in their case. And why does this happen? Why do these inconsistencies happen? Well, they happen all the time, first of all, even to people who are smart and sophisticated, as this person is. And even when you're telling the truth, as I honestly believe that this person was, and even if you have a good case, as this guy did or should have had, inconsistencies still happen. Why? Because it's hard. Because the asylum interview is difficult. The officer doesn't just let you express yourself and explain your story. Rather, they ask you question after question after question after question. They're constantly interrupting you. They're changing topics frequently. And some of them, sadly, are anti-immigrant, and they're looking for an excuse to deny you. They're looking for an excuse, and some of them are actually trying to trip you up so that you'll make mistakes, so they'll have an excuse to deny you. And that's what I think was happening in this case with this guy from Afghanistan, because the reasoning that the asylum officer gave in the notice of intent to deny, it was ridiculous, to be frank. It didn't really make sense. It did not support this decision that this person was not credible. But this person did say a couple things that sounded at least like they didn't really match up very well, that they contradicted each other. And it gave the officer who was looking for an excuse, it gave them the excuse they needed to be able to say, oh, not credible, you're denied. Now, if this person had had a lawyer with them at their interview, a good lawyer would say, I'm confident that the asylum lawyer would have been able to help clear up one or two of these things that were really actually just misunderstandings, because that's what many inconsistencies are. It's simply a misunderstanding, whether that's due to language differences between the applicant and the officer, or just to the two people talking past each other and just having a misunderstanding. It really is these just communication issues and misunderstandings that very often the officer thinks, oh, that's another inconsistency and another strike against you, and 2 or 3 of those, and you're not credible and you get denied because of it. So if I had been there at the person's interview, I think that I would have been able to jump in and say, oh, excuse me, officer, I think there may have been a misunderstanding, because when you said that one thing, he said something that made it sound like he didn't understand the question. Could you please repeat that question and use different words this time? So when I do that, which I do all the time, I do that in every single asylum interview, at least once, usually multiple times. I have to jump in where I realize I can tell that the applicant doesn't understand the officer, or the officer has misunderstood the applicant, and I jump in to clarify. And that's really important. But that didn't happen for this man. And because of that, the officer thought that there were more inconsistencies than there really were. And he used that as an excuse to come up with this negative credibility decision and this determination that, well, we're going to have to deny you unless you can change our minds. So what do we do? Well, in this case, this man hired me to help him with this written response to the notice of intent to deny. And so I tried to explain in that, well, here are the reasons basically that you're wrong, officer. You do this to try to be, well, you want to try to be respectful and professional. That's always important. You don't want to come in with this bad attitude and make the officer mad at you. But you also need to show them why they were wrong. You have to point out exactly why their reasoning is flawed. And so that's what I did for this person, was I basically picked apart the arguments that the asylum officer was making and saying, oh, these were the different inconsistencies and here's why you're not eligible. So I do that in writing, and I essentially write what's basically a legal brief where I explain why he's eligible for asylum and why the officer was wrong, and how the officer actually didn't follow USCIS's own guidelines in making this negative credibility determination. Because you see, USCIS, just like every company or government agency, has rules and guidelines for how their officers are supposed to go about making decisions. And in this case, the officer didn't really follow those very well in making this decision to say that the person had these inconsistencies and wasn't credible. Because there's actually, it's public. You can find this if you do the right Googling. You can find the guidance that USCIS has that officers have to follow. And so I use that to say, listen, you didn't even follow your own agency's rules for making this kind of a decision. So, if you had done it correctly, here's what would have happened. He'd be eligible for asylum, because he is eligible for asylum. So that's the kind of argument that I'm making for this person. And again, we haven't gotten a decision back. I don't know if we're going to be successful, because even though we have a good argument, like I said, it's hard. It's hard to change USCIS's mind if they've already decided they don't think that you're eligible for asylum. So how do you avoid being in this position? Well, you do things right the first time. You actually supply some evidence with your interview that shows that the key aspects of your case that you need to convince the officer of are in fact true, and you show them that that you've got a real case, and then you prepare for the interview. You actually do need to practice for the interview. Now, different lawyers do this differently, right? And when I was an asylum officer with the government, I used to be an asylum officer at the Houston Asylum Office. I was actually surprised back then when I could see that the people who came before me, the applicants that had lawyers, most of them were not prepared. Most of them did not know what they were getting into. They were shocked. They were shocked by how hard the interview was, because it's, like I said earlier, it's hard and it's very different than what people expect. They think they're just going to go explain themselves and tell their story, but that's not how it works at all. And so I was surprised that when I was an asylum officer, that the lawyers didn't do a better job of preparing these people for the interview. And I was also shocked that these lawyers really never, ever explained to me as the officer in writing why their client should get asylum. And that's a huge missed opportunity. Now, as an asylum lawyer, I always write a legal brief where I take the facts of my client's case and I package them in a certain way that I think is persuasive and compelling. And then I apply them to the laws and policies that USCIS follows to show the officer exactly why my client is eligible for asylum. That way, when you've got the right documents, when you've got a good legal brief from an asylum lawyer, and you've got evidence that was thoughtfully put together, then in your citing, in my briefs, I cite all the resources that the asylum officers themselves are taught to trust in doing their research. When you do all this together, you can lay the groundwork. You can set the stage such that the officer is thinking before you ever, as the applicant, ever walk in the room for the interview. Okay, based on the documents, yeah, I do think that this applicant is eligible for asylum. And as long as they show up to the interview and say things that line up with what's in the documents, I already plan to give them asylum. You can do that. You can create that feeling in the asylum officer's mind. And I call this pre-suading them. You're basically setting the stage and making it more likely they're going to say yes at the time of the interview. But most lawyers don't do that. Most lawyers don't write a legal brief at all or explain in any way in writing why the applicant, why their client is eligible for asylum. And they don't help prepare the people for the interview. I do a full-scale mock interview or practice interview with my clients where we do everything that they're going to experience on the day of the real interview from beginning to end. And that way they go into the real interview much more confident, much more comfortable, because they already know what kind of questions to expect. They already know what it feels like to be in this difficult position. They know what the different procedures are for the day, all of that. And then afterwards, we go over it in a debrief session where we talk about things they did well, things they could improve on, different ways they could try to phrase something to be clearer. And I do some other things too with them that are going to help them to prepare. But this guy, this man who hired me, after the fact, after he had already had his interview, he didn't benefit from anything like that. He tried to do this on his own, and it hurt him. It hurt him. You can never say 100% guarantee that someone is going to win asylum or get any other immigration benefit. You can't say that. And if a lawyer ever tells you that, run in the other direction. But when it comes to cases that I can say with a lot of confidence, I think I could have helped them to win the case if they had hired me from the beginning. This is one of those where with a little bit of the right help, yeah, this guy should have won asylum after his first interview and shouldn't be in a position now where there's a really good chance that he could get denied. Because like I said, they very rarely change their minds in response to the written argument that someone makes after they receive a notice of intent to deny. It's tough to win at that stage. So what's the point of all this? Well, do it right the first time. Don't leave it up to chance and think, you know what? I probably got this myself. I can probably do it. The truth is this. A lot of you watching on Facebook and on YouTube, a lot of you watching are smart, sophisticated people. and you could probably put together a decent asylum case. But I promise you, an asylum officer who is an asylum lawyer who's a former asylum officer from the government and who actually is invested in your case is going to do a better job. So don't put yourself in the position where you say, well, I'll at least try it on my own, and then if something goes wrong, then I'll hire a lawyer. Don't do that. That's going to stress you out, and it's going to make it really hard for you to ultimately win your case. Okay, so hire a lawyer to start with. Okay, I mean, that's obviously, I'm self-interested in saying that because I'm an asylum lawyer, but I truly believe that that's the right thing for you to do if you want to increase your chances and maximize your chances for success. Okay. Yeah, get help, Don't do it yourself, or you could end up like if this guy from Afghanistan, who really definitely should win asylum, if he might not win asylum now, whew, what does that tell you for the rest of us? Right, for people from other countries where the approval rates are much lower. Okay, so you could be in danger. You should try your best to do it the right way. All right. We've got some questions both over on Facebook and on YouTube. So, how much time will it take for? And I've got just a couple minutes here. How much time will it take for a credible fear interview for asylum seekers? I applied last year, October of 2021. Okay, so credible fear interview is different than an asylum interview. You don't really apply for a credible fear interview. That's for people that come to the border or are caught shortly after they cross the border, and they do a kind of like a mini asylum interview. I don't have time to go into it here, unfortunately, but it's different than you don't apply for a credible fear interview. You're given a credible fear interview. But if you're talking, Naveen Kumar, if you're talking about having applied for asylum, not credible fear, but for asylum in October 2021, there's still a decent chance that you will get your interview very soon, because for about the last 6 months, many people have been getting their interviews very quickly. Usually we've been seeing about 2 months, especially if you apply online. You can apply online now. This is new with USCIS. And if you apply online, we've been seeing a lot of people getting their interviews within 2 months. We've had one that got it within a month. So there's still a chance that you'll get your interview soon, Naveen. But if you don't get it in the next 2 or 3 months, then I would say there's a good chance that you won't get it for quite a long time, unfortunately. Hannah says, I want you to be my lawyer. The cost is too high. I think there's a question mark, so I guess that's a question. Thank you. I appreciate that. I'm honored that you would say that. To hire me, it starts with an asylum strategy session. It's a consultation where you call my office or you use a link to set up a time for us to talk. Usually by video conference is preferable. And I'll ask you some questions and get to understand your case. And then I'll tell you if I think you have a chance of winning. I only represent people if I think they have a real chance of winning and that I can help them to make their chances higher. I do often tell people, I'm sorry, I can't help you. In fact, just an hour ago, I had a consultation with someone where I said, you know what, I think your chances for winning are virtually zero. And so I'm not going to take thousands of dollars from you if I think that I can't really help you in a meaningful, serious way. I do that pretty often, actually. So I'll tell you what, I'll give you an honest answer about what I think your chances for success are and whether I think I can help you. In terms of the cost, all cases are different. So call me, set up a consultation or what I call an asylum strategy session, and we'll talk about your circumstances, and I'll let you know upfront at that point how much it would cost. I do offer payment plans, just so everyone knows. I require a payment up front to get started, an initial payment, and then there are payment plans after that, monthly payments. So Francis says, hello, Manning. I'd like to have your email address. I'll be happy to post that here. Brian at Manning Asylum, asylumlaw.com. I spelled that right, manningasylumlaw.com. There's my email address, Brian at manningasylumlaw.com. And you can email me there. But the best thing to do, honestly, if you want to possibly get my help, is schedule an asylum strategy session. I'm going to post a link now for that, where you can do that. 1 second. If you email me, if you have like a real quick question about something that's easy for me to answer, I'll be happy to answer you by email. But if you really want to talk about your case and get my opinion on it, and possibly consider hiring me to see if you qualify for representation from our firm, we would need to do that in an asylum strategy session. Okay. I'm gonna put the link. I'm putting in the link in the chat right now to schedule an asylum strategy session with me if any of you are interested. Yep. Thanks. Should be coming up soon. There we go. Okay. Okay. Dante asks, thanks for asking. Dante says, should you have all the details in your case written, or will they be asked in your interview? Well, both. Well, not all. The short answer is yes. You want to write out in a declaration or a personal statement, as it's usually called at the asylum office, what your case is about. You're explaining what has happened and why it is that you're afraid to go back to your country. And you do want to include some details. You don't need to give every single last detail, but you need to give enough detail to show the officer, to give them a sense for what has gone on and what your case is about. So yes, I do definitely strongly recommend writing a personal statement. And in fact, I've got a video about that on my YouTube channel on Manning. If you go to YouTube and search Manning Asylum Law, you'll see, you can find a video that's all about writing a personal statement. It's a long, very detailed video that a lot of folks have found very helpful for getting some guidance on how to do that. Okay. So yeah, I do recommend a personal statement, but you got to keep it short. That's one of the main errors that people commit in their declaration or personal statement, is they'll have it be like 10 or 15 pages long, single spaced, and they're just talking about all kinds of stuff that has really nothing to do with their asylum case. And that's because most people don't really know what it takes to win asylum. Most people don't know what you actually need to show the officer to win. Okay, and so that's a reason that you should watch my YouTube videos where I talk about how you win asylum, what you need to show to win asylum. Okay. And when you're ready to talk about it in detail, give me a call. You can see the telephone number for my law firm is up above me on the screen. It's 713-909-0401. Give us a call and we can talk in a strategy session. All right. All right. So Suresh says, I attended my interview on January 13th. I'm still waiting for my result. Could you please tell me when I can expect my result? What are we now? February 22nd? All right. So it's been a little over a month. That's pretty normal. The good question that you're asking here is, what happens after your interview? How long does it take to get a decision? Well, it takes usually at least a few weeks. The minimum that you're going to see is 2 weeks. I would say probably about where you're at now, a little over a month is probably the average. Okay. But the bad news is it can take much longer. Unfortunately, it can take a lot longer. Okay. So it may take several more weeks or even months or even longer sometimes. Okay. So if you get to where you've been waiting for, I would say at 3 months, you can send the asylum office an email and say, hey, what's the status of my case? Do you need anything further from me to make a decision? Look forward to hearing from you. And sometimes that helps. Okay. If you go longer, and especially if your case has been pending a long time, like for example, if you applied a long time ago, it took a long time to get your interview, and then it takes months to get your decision after your interview, you can sue the government. Okay. We help people do that to make them take action on your case. Okay. I'll say more about that in a different setting. So I want to address this one from Brian. Hey, Brian, great name. It says, can you represent me at the interview since I filed alone? Good question. Yes. So there's a lot you can still do to improve your case, even though you already applied for asylum. We help people like you, Brian, in your position all the time. That is to say, people that have already applied, either by themselves or with the help of another lawyer. And now they realize, you know what? There are some things that I could probably do to improve my case, and to have a good lawyer with me at the interview. Yes, there's a lot you can do. The answer is yes. I do multiple things with people that have already applied for asylum and then want my help. There's kind of 3 steps. I don't have time to go into. I got to go into a minute. I don't have time right now to go into detail to them, but they consist of documents. We would do a supplemental filing where I'm going to write a legal brief for your case, and I'm going to tell you about additional. I'm going to make a list of additional evidence that you should try to get. Maybe you already did a great job of submitting evidence, but I promise you there's more that I'm going to suggest that you try to get. And I'm going to, we're going to send that in as a supplemental filing and say, hey, also consider this in the case. And by the way, please schedule their interview. That's step 1 is the supplemental filing. Step 2 is preparation. We would do a full-scale mock interview, a practice interview that I was describing a little bit earlier, where we do everything that you're going to experience in the day of the interview. And this is an absolute key. My former clients will tell you this, that this is huge for them. If you go to if you Google Manning Asylum Law, you'll see my business page, Google business page. You'll see there's lots of reviews on there where people talk about this, about how helpful the mock interview was, the practice interview. So we'll do that. And then, yes, we can represent you at your interview. And the biggest thing there, the most important aspect of that is that at the end of the interview, the lawyer gets a chance to say a few words. And at the end, I usually use my time more than anything to address issues that have come up during the interview. I think I'm pretty good at telling based on the atmosphere in the room, based on the questions being asked. I'm good at telling, I think, what the officer views as a weakness in your case, what things about your case they don't like, or they think are weak parts of your case. And I'm also, so I use my time to address those things, to clarify or explain those key points that are holding them back from giving you an answer that you want, from getting to yes in your case. Okay. Okay, I've got to go, unfortunately, but feel free to leave comments below this video for additional questions. If you're ready to talk in detail about your case and what my law firm can do to help you increase your chances for success, then whether you've already applied or you're about to apply, then let us know. I'd love to talk to you in an asylum strategy session. I posted a bit earlier the link that you can click on to schedule that online, or you can call my office at the number above. That's 713-909-0401 to schedule your asylum strategy session now. I'd love to talk to you. I welcome the chance, and thanks for watching. I thank you for watching, and hope we'll all be in touch